Behind a high waterfall near the head of the Oconaluftee River, in the mountains of western North Carolina, there is a cave. Two hunters from a Cherokee settlement called Raventown went in behind the falling water, and the floor of that cave was covered in footprints, small ones, the size a young child's foot would leave, pressed fresh into the wet ground, going nowhere and coming from nowhere. And there were no children up there. There was no one at all. Up in those same mountains, on the high grassy balds where the timber gives out, people walking alone have heard a drum. Close by, a steady beat, and under it singing, coming from a spot just over the next rise. And every time someone climbed toward it to see who could be dancing in a place like that, the drum moved. It slipped behind them. It came from somewhere else. Nobody ever walked up on the ones making it. The Cherokee had a name for whoever left those footprints and beat that drum. They called them the Yunwi Sunsdi, the Little People. And I want to tell you what the Cherokee knew about them, because it was written down, carefully, by a real man, on real pages you can still open today. His name was James Mooney, and the book is called Myths of the Cherokee. It was printed in the year 1900 by the Smithsonian's Bureau of American Ethnology, in Washington, as part of their 19th annual report. The cave behind the waterfall sits on a real reservation. The footprints are written down on a real page. Everything strange I am about to tell you is strange in exactly that way. It sits inside a government report that is well over a century old, and anyone can read it. So let me be straight with you before we go a step further, because this is the kind of subject where a lot of people are not straight with you. Mooney was an ethnographer, born in 1861, sent into the Carolina mountains to live among the eastern Cherokee and write down what the old people still remembered, before it slipped away for good. He spent years at it, starting in 1887, mostly on the Qualla Reservation, the land the eastern band of Cherokee still holds along the edge of the Great Smoky Mountains. And he did the one thing that makes all the difference here. When somebody told him a story, he wrote down who told it. He kept the names. And that single habit is the reason any of this holds up at all. Anybody can tell you the mountains are haunted. What Mooney did instead was write down that a particular old man, in a particular cabin, in a particular year, said a particular thing, and then he signed it with that man's name. Almost everything you are about to hear has a name attached to it like that, and where it does not, I will say so. That is why this is not a ghost hunting show. What I am giving you has nothing to do with aliens, or with some hidden non-human species from the sky, or with anything a stranger typed into a forum last year. These are stories that Cherokee people, named Cherokee people, told to a man with a notebook more than 130 years ago, in their own mountains, in their own words. I read the book, the whole thing. And every time we step off of something solid, a real mountain, a real cave, a real page, and into the legend itself, I am going to stop and say so, out loud, so you always know which ground you are standing on. That line matters to the truth, and it matters to the people whose story this is. One thing I have to clear up first, because two different kinds of hidden people live in Mooney's pages, and they get mixed together constantly. There are the Nanihi, the immortals, and there are the little people, and they are not the same. The Nanihi are full-sized. They live in townhouses under the high peaks and under the rivers, and they look and talk like any other Cherokee. Mooney says it plainly. Some people thought the two were the same, but the little people are fairies, no bigger than children. The tall, immortal townspeople are a whole story of their own, and I am leaving them for another day. Today is only about the small ones, the knee-high people of the rock caves. So here is how Mooney set them down, and I am staying close to his words. The little people were a race of spirits who lived in caves in the rock, up on the mountainside. They were little fellows, he wrote, hardly reaching up to a grown man's knee, but well-shaped and handsome, with long hair falling almost to the ground. They were great wonder workers, and more than anything, they loved music. They spent, in his phrase, half their time drumming and dancing. That is the drum on the balds. That is who is up there. And I should tell you what a bald even is, because it changes the picture. Up in the Great Smoky Mountains, some of the highest peaks are not capped with forest. They are capped with open grass, treeless, for reasons botanists still argue about, and the Cherokee had known those grassy summits for centuries. They are called balds. They are high and lonely and quiet, and the wind is always moving the grass. and if you have ever stood on one, you know that it is exactly the kind of place where a person could believe a drum was beating just out of sight. The Oconaluftee River, where several of these stories happen, rises right up in those same mountains and runs down through the Cherokee Reservation. None of that is invented country. It is a place you can drive to this year, and a good part of it is a national park now. Now sit with what they are, because this is exactly where the modern retellings go off the rails. In the notes at the back of the book, Mooney lays out what kind of beings these are, and he is careful about it. They are not gods. They have nothing to do with the great powers that run the sun and the rain and the thunder. They are not the spirits of the animals or the plants, and they are not the ghosts of the human dead. They are their own separate order of being, what he calls supernatural human beings. Spirits of the woods, and the cliffs, and the waters. Fairy folk. The Cherokee word says as much in plain letters. Yunwi means person, or people. Tsunsdi means little. Put the two together and you get little people, and the word itself refuses the alien reading. It does not say creatures, and it does not say visitors from the sky. It says people, small ones and hidden ones, belonging to those exact mountains, but people all the same. Mooney actually opens his notes on these beings by saying something that has stuck with me. The belief in little hidden people, he writes, is so common among all the peoples of the earth that there is no point in even listing the parallels. Every people has its spirits of the woods and the cliffs and the waters, usually kindly when they are left alone, often mischievous, and once in a while cruel. So he is not treating the Cherokee as some exotic curiosity. He is saying the opposite. This is one of the most human things there is, believed on every continent, and what he has caught on his pages is the specific Cherokee shape of it, with its own names, its own rules, grown up out of its own mountains. I want to plant that flag now and leave it standing, because you will find a great deal of nonsense attached to these beings online, and none of it is in the record. The Cherokee did not describe sky people. They described neighbors you could not see, who lived in the rocks above the town, and who had to be handled the way you handle neighbors, with manners. Which brings me to the first place I have to stop and mark the line for you. If you go looking for the little people today, on almost any website, you will read that they came in three kinds. The rock people, who are cruel and pay you back for cruelty, the laurel people, who are playful and pull harmless pranks, and the dogwood people, who are gentle and do good and look after the sick. It is a tidy little system. 3 clans, 3 temperaments. People repeat it everywhere as ancient Cherokee teaching. Here is the honest part. That 3-part scheme is not in Mooney. I went looking for it, line by line, and it is not on his pages anywhere. He did not sort the little people into rock and laurel and dogwood. He wrote about them as one people, kind one day and dangerous the next. The neat 3-clan version came later, and it belongs to the tradition as it kept living and growing in the 120-odd years after he closed his notebook, not to the record he actually left. I am not telling you the 3 kinds are false. A living tradition is allowed to grow, and the people who carry this one are still here, still telling it, and it is theirs to tell. I am telling you which layer you are standing on. When somebody hands you the 3 clans as something written down in the 1800s, that is a newer floor built on top of an older one. The older floor, the one underneath everything, is one man's careful pages, and on those pages, the little people are simpler and stranger than the tidy version. They are just there, in the rocks, with rules. And the rules were the whole point. The first one was about finding things. When a hunter came across something out in the woods, a knife, a bead, some small useful trinket lying where it had no reason to be, he was not supposed to just pick it up. It might belong to them, so he said it out loud, to the air. Little people, I want to take this. If he asked, it was his. If he took it in silence, they threw stones at him the whole way home. Think about what that means as a habit of mind. You moved through that country assuming you were not alone in it, assuming the woods had owners you could not see, and you spoke to them out of plain courtesy. It is a small thing, a hunter muttering one sentence to the empty air before he pockets a lost knife, but it tells you the whole shape of the relationship. The land was not simply there for the taking, it was already occupied, and the polite thing, and the safe thing, was to ask. The second rule was harder, and it had a darker edge. Sometimes the little people came down near a house at night. The family inside would hear them out there, talking, moving around, and the rule was absolute. You did not go out. You stayed in and you let them be. In the morning, people would find that the corn had been gathered in, or a whole field had been cleared, as if a full crew of men had worked it in the dark. A gift, done quietly, while you slept. But there was a price on watching. Mooney puts it in one flat sentence that I have not been able to shake. If anyone should go out to watch, he would die. The warning was not that you would go blind or lose your mind, it was that you would die. The help was real, and the curiosity was fatal, and the Cherokee held both of those ideas at once without blinking. I keep circling back to that field cleared in the dark. It is such a generous image, a whole crew of invisible neighbors doing your hardest labor while you sleep, and it comes stapled to a death sentence for the one who peeks out the door to watch. The Cherokee were not confused by that combination. They understood that a gift from the hidden people came with the hidden people's terms, and that the terms were not up for discussion. And they were not the only ones up there. This is worth a minute, because it tells you how full that country really was. The same pages describe a whole population of small hidden persons, each with a name and a job. There were the water dwellers, the Yunwi Amayanehi, who lived in the rivers, and fishermen prayed to them for a good catch. There were two little sprites named Tsawasi and Sagasi that hunters called on by name in their prayers. Sawasi was a tiny, handsome fellow with hair down to his feet, who made his home in the grassy patches on the hillsides and had power over the deer, and if you prayed to him, he would give you the skill to slip up through the tall grass without being seen. His companion helped too, but he had a mean streak, and when you tripped over nothing and went down hard, that was him. And there was Detsada, who had once been an ordinary Cherokee boy. The boy ran off into the woods to dodge a painful ceremony, and he simply never came back, and never let himself be seen again. Now he spends all his time hunting birds, and when a flock bursts up out of a tree for no reason, that is him chasing them. And when a bird hunter fires an arrow into open air and then cannot find it anywhere, the hunter has to say his name and threaten to scratch him, and then the arrow turns up. I give you those because I want you to feel the world the little people lived in. To a Cherokee hunter, the forest was not empty scenery he walked through. It was crowded with small persons who had names and moods and expectations, and you kept up your end of every one of those relationships. It was a busy, negotiated, slightly nervous way to walk through the woods, and to them it was completely ordinary. But of all of them, the little people of the rock caves were the ones the serious stories were about. So back to them. Now, remember that drum, the one that slips away every time somebody climbs toward it. Their drum was heard in lonely places up in the mountains, and Mooney is blunt about what you were supposed to do when you heard it. Nothing. You left it alone. Because the little people did not like to be disturbed at home, and if you came looking for them uninvited, they threw a spell over you. You got turned around, and the country you knew went strange, and you could not find your way, and here is the line that stays with me. Even if you did finally stumble back to the settlement, you were, in his words, like one dazed ever after. You came home wrong. Something got left up on that mountain that never came back down with you. That is a specific and haunting idea, and it is worth slowing down on. The danger was not being eaten, or attacked, or dragged off. The danger was quieter than that. You could go up whole and come back down with a piece missing, still walking, still breathing, but permanently turned around, as if the mountain had gently kept part of you and sent the rest of you home. And this is one of those places where the record goes deeper than a single storyteller, which is how you know it was a real, widespread belief, and not one man's tale. In his notes, Mooney gathers up other accounts of the same thing. An early missionary had written that the Cherokee thought crazy people were afflicted by these spirits. Another collector's Cherokee informant said, and I am quoting, "The little people cause men to lose their minds and run away and wander in the forests," and he added that they wear very long hair, down to their heels, the same detail from a completely different source. And a related people to the south, the Creeks, drew a line so precise it stops me every time. When a man's mind becomes bewildered, they said, not crazy, that is the work of the little people. Sit on that distinction for a second, because it is doing something careful. Bewildered, not crazy. There is a difference between a person who is broken and a person who has been led somewhere and cannot find the way back. This is a people looking straight at a real and frightening thing. A person walking out of deep mountain country with his mind come loose, and explaining it not as a curse and not as a madness but as a boundary crossed, a courtesy owed to hidden neighbors that somebody failed to pay. That is not a superstition thrown at the dark. That is a theory of the country. And it is a humane one, when you look straight at it. It does not call the lost man a fool, or a sinner, or a weakling. It says he crossed a line he could not see, in country that belonged to someone else, and it hands his family a way to understand what happened to him that leaves his dignity intact. There is a real mercy folded into that, and these stories are full of it. If you're new here and enjoying this kind of historical depth, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because for all of that, for the stone throwing and the spell, and the flat little warning about watching, this is not a story about monsters. Turn the same beings a quarter turn, and you get the thing the Cherokee said about them most often, and most tenderly. They were helpful, and they were kind-hearted, in Mooney's own 2 words. And their great specialty, the thing they were known for, was finding people who had gotten lost in the mountains, and above all finding lost children. A child who wandered away from the town and did not come back by dark, in country that could kill a grown man in a single night, was exactly who the little people took care of. They found the child, they kept the child safe, and they brought the child home. That belief sits right next to the belief that they would strike you dead for watching them work. The same small people who would stone a rude hunter would carry a lost 4-year-old down off a freezing mountain and set her back on her own trail. Both of those are true at once, in the same tradition, told by the same people. We tend to want our monsters to be all monster, with nothing gentle in them anywhere. The Cherokee did not need them that tidy. The neighbors who kept those woods dangerous were the very ones who kept them survivable, and a mother whose lost child walked back into the village alive was not going to sit down and file those 2 feelings in separate drawers. And I think you only really understand the little people when you can hold both at the same time, the way the Cherokee did. Let me give you the deeper stories now, the ones where somebody actually went in. The first is about a hunter in winter, and it is short, and it is terrible. He was out in the snow, and he found tracks. Small tracks, like the tracks of little children, out there in the cold where no child should be. And instead of leaving them alone, he followed them. They led him to a cave, and the cave was full of the little people, young and old, men, women, and children, a whole community of them. And they were kind to him. They brought him in. He stayed with them for a while, warm, looked after. But when it was time for him to go, they told him the one condition, the same condition that runs under this entire tradition. He must not tell. If he told anyone what he had seen, he would die. He went home. And of course his friends wanted to know where he had been, and of course he put them off. For a long time he kept the secret, and he kept his life. But it wore on him, the way a thing you are forbidden to say wears on a person. And at last he could not hold it in any longer, and he told the story. And in a few days, Mooney writes, he died. The cave never hurt him. He came home from it fine, and he lived. Right up until the day he finally told what he had seen. The telling was the thing that killed him. I want to be careful and fair here, the way the record is. Mooney does not give this hunter a name. He does not tell us the settlement, or the year. Some of these accounts reached him with names and dates attached, and some did not. And where the record is silent, I am going to stay silent too, rather than invent a man to make the story feel more solid. What the record gives us is the shape, and the shape is enough. It is a story the Cherokee passed down about the weight of a secret, and about a debt that comes due the moment you finally set it down. Every culture that tells fairy stories has some version of this same rule. The wonder you are shown only on the condition that you never speak of it. The Cherokee version is one of the plainest and one of the harshest of all of them. You could be shown the inside of the mountain, and then you had to carry it in silence for the rest of your life. The second story has a name and a season, and it is the one I cannot stop thinking about. About 25 years before Mooney wrote his book, so back around the 1860s or 70s, a man named Santawu got lost in the mountains at the head of the Oconaluftee. It was deep winter and bitterly cold, and after enough days his friends decided he was dead. There was no other way to figure it. Then, after 16 days, he walked back into the settlement alive. And this is what he told them. The little people had found him and taken him to their cave, and they had treated him well. They gave him plenty of everything to eat, except bread. The bread was the strange part. It came in big loaves, but when he took a loaf in his hands to eat it, it shrank down into small cakes, so light and so crumbly that he could eat all day and never once feel full. When he was rested, they brought him part of the way home, until they came to a little creek, only about knee-deep, and they told him to wade across it to pick up the main trail on the far side. So he waded across. And when he reached the other bank and turned around to look back at them, they were gone. And the creek he had just walked through was no longer knee-deep, it was a deep river. He made it home. But his legs had frozen to the knees, somewhere out in those 16 days, and he lived only a few days after that. Now, Mooney does something in his notes here that I love, because it shows you a careful mind at work. He points out that the detail of the fairy food, the loaves that shrink to nothing when you try to eat them, is the exact same detail you find in old European peasant stories about fairies. The food that never satisfies once the spell is off. He is not saying the Cherokee borrowed it. He is noticing that people who had never met, on two different continents, told the same kind of story about the same kind of hidden folk, and the tale lets you read it two ways, and both ways hurt. Either the little people saved a freezing man and gave him 16 days he would not otherwise have had, or the cave, and the bread, and the gentleness were the last mercy the mountain offered a man who was already dying in the snow, a warm dream laid over the cold. The tradition does not choose for you. It just tells you he came home and told what he saw, and then he was gone. And then there is the one that hit me hardest, because of when it happened. Just after the war, Mooney writes, meaning the Civil War, there was smallpox among the East Cherokee. Now hold the weight of that for a second. This is a people who had already been through the removal, already watched a huge part of the nation marched west at gunpoint, and the ones who managed to stay in the Carolina mountains were the survivors of exactly that. And now, a generation later, smallpox is moving through those same survivors. During that outbreak, one sick man wandered off from his people. They searched for him and could not find him, and you can imagine what they feared, with smallpox in the settlement and a sick man missing somewhere in the hills. But after several weeks, he came back, and he said that the little people had come across him out there and taken him to one of their caves and tended him until he was cured. I do not think that is a spooky story. Set against what those people were actually living through, disease sweeping a community that had already survived being torn out of its own country, that is one of the gentlest things a tradition ever produced. It is a story of frightened, grieving people told about being cared for by the mountain itself, at a moment when almost no one on earth was caring for them. And it was not only a comfort at the edges. The little people were woven right into how the Cherokee doctored their own. One of Mooney's oldest sources was a man called John Axe, born around the year 1800, the oldest man in the whole band by the time Mooney knew him. And John Axe explained that a person who owned one of the sacred crystals, the ulansuti, could call up one of the little folk and stand it on guard beside a sick person to keep the sickness from creeping back in once it had been driven out. So they were not only out on the balds beating a drum, they were in the room when a Cherokee healer went to work. They were part of the medicine. And I want you to notice something about the timing of all of this, because it is easy to walk right past. These are not ancient myths, worn smooth over 1,000 years. When Mooney wrote them down, they were fresh. The two hunters found those footprints behind the waterfall only a few years before his book went to the printer. Santawu froze on that same river about 25 years before that, close enough that people still said his name out loud. The smallpox rescue had happened within the living memory of half the grown people in the settlement. To the Cherokee sitting across from Mooney, these were not old bedtime stories about the deep past. They were a current fact about the mountain right outside the door, something that had happened, recently, to a man you might have known by name. Which makes the next kind of story the saddest of all, because it is about them leaving. There is an account, and Mooney marks in his notes that this one came from a Cherokee manuscript written by a woman named Wananauhi. It goes like this. The little people for a long time had been very good to a certain settlement, helping with the work at night, taking care of the lost children, the whole gift. And then something happened. Somebody offended them. The record does not even say what, which is its own kind of true, because you do not always know what you did. And they decided to leave. The people who were watching saw the whole company of little people come down together to the ford of the river, and cross over, and disappear into the mouth of a large cave on the other side, and they were never heard from near that settlement again. You can feel what that story is really about. It is about a relationship ending. It is about waking up one morning in a place that used to be full and finding it empty, and knowing, somehow, that it was your own side that broke it. Nobody comes and tells you what you did wrong. You just notice that the drumming has stopped, and that the corn is no longer gathered in during the night, and you are left to work out for yourself which piece of the old courtesy your people let fall. And that emptiness has a date on it. Mooney says the drumming was still heard in the high balds almost up to the time of the removal. The removal is 1838, the Trail of Tears, when the government marched most of the Cherokee Nation 1,000 miles west, and thousands of them died on the road. And here the legend and the documented history close together like a hand, because of the man who gave Mooney so many of these stories. His name was James Wofford. The Cherokee called him Worn Out Blanket. He was born in Georgia in 1806, and his mother was a cousin of Sequoyah, the man who gave the Cherokee their written alphabet. Wofford was educated. He read and wrote in 2 languages, and he did not treat any of this as make-believe. Mooney says he was a firm believer in the immortals to the end, and that some of the best of these legends came straight from him. But here is the thing about Wofford that puts a floor under this entire video. When the removal came in 1838, Wofford himself was one of the 2 men who commanded the largest single detachment of Cherokee driven west. He did not just remember the Trail of Tears, he led people down it. And then he carried the old stories the rest of his long life. And when Mooney finally sat with him, out at Tahlequah in the Western Nation, in 1891, Wofford was about 85 years old, and his memory was still sharp, and he told a young man with a notebook about the little people, the drum up in the high balds, all of it. The living thread runs straight from the mountains where all of this happened, through a man who walked that road himself, into the book you can open tonight. The enemy in this whole story, if there even is one, was never a monster in a cave. It was the year 1838. It was distance. It was forgetting. So let me end where the whole thing actually rested, on a handful of very old people, and one outsider who bothered to write it all down. Most of what Mooney got, he got from a man the Cherokee called Swimmer, Ayunini, in their own language. Swimmer was born around 1835, just before the removal, and he had been raised and trained to be a priest and a doctor and a keeper of the old knowledge, and Mooney said nearly 3/4 of everything in the book came from him alone. Swimmer spoke no English at all. He kept the moccasins and the turban and the rattle his whole life. And he died in the spring of 1899, and Mooney wrote a line about it that I think about a lot. With him, he said, "Perished half the tradition of a people, half of it, gone, with one man, in one spring." That is what was actually at stake in those cabins, and it was not a quaint pile of fairy tales. It was the living memory of a whole nation, sitting inside 3 or 4 very old people, at the last possible moment when it could still be caught. Swimmer, who carried most of it. John Axe, born around 1800, who loved the wonder stories best of anything. Wofford, who led the detachment west and believed every word. And one ethnographer who showed up in time, kept his mouth shut, and kept the names. If any one of those old people had died 5 years earlier, or if Mooney had come along 5 years later, we would have almost none of this. We would have a beautiful silent mountain, and no idea at all who the Cherokee said used to live inside it. So here, one last time, is the line between what you can touch and what you cannot. Because I promised you I would always draw it. The mountains are real. You can drive into them this weekend. The Oconaluftee is real, and the reservation is real, and Raventown is a real place on the map, and the book is real, every page of it, sitting in a library and sitting online. The cave behind the high waterfall is real, and 2 hunters really did walk in behind that water, and come back out, and tell people what was pressed into the floor. That is the solid ground, all of it. What the footprints were, whether there is anyone up on the balds beating a drum that slides away when you climb toward it. That is the part I cannot hand you, and I am not going to pretend that I can. That is the legend. You get to decide what to do with it. But I will tell you what the Cherokee knew, because that part is not in doubt. They knew the country was not empty. They knew it had manners, and a temper, and a strange deep kindness that would carry a lost child home and stand guard over a sick man, and then turn around and strike you dead for the sin of watching. They knew you owed the woods a certain respect, and they knew what it cost when the respect ran out and the drumming stopped. Whatever the little folk actually were, the Cherokee did the one thing that keeps any of it alive. They told it, to a man who wrote it down, so that all these years later, you and I could sit here and know their neighbors' names. Before we close, if these old stories and the people who first wrote them down are what you came for, the final boss tier at $9.99 gets you members-only videos, plus your name in upcoming uploads. Boss tier at $4.99 for early access. Link in the description. Thanks for watching to the end. And the next time you are up in the Smokies, and it goes quiet, and you are certain you are alone out there, remember that the people who knew that country best, for longer than anyone, would have told you that you are not.